JPMorgan now predicts up to $14 billion in inflows could go into XRP and Solana. Let's get into what this information could mean for both those assets. The post highlights a major prediction from JPMorgan Chase regarding the potential impact of spot for ETFs for XRP and Solana on the crypto market. Specifically, the bank forecast the newly proposed XRP and Solana ETFs could draw a combined $14 billion in inflows within the first year if approved by regulators. JPMorgan's ETF inflow prediction, analysts project that spot ETFs and XRP and Solana could effectively see $14 billion. For XRP specifically, the inflows could be between 4 and 8 billion. This has actually gone from 3 to 8 billion to 4 to 8 billion. The projections are starting to tick up. We're going to get some more information on these predictions once all the ETFs are approved and we start to see what those inflows are really going to be. Right now, we are just guessing. This number could obviously be higher or it could be lower in the days to come. This forecast is being widely shared by influential crypto news sources like Watcher Guru, yada, yada, yada. It does talk about some historical examples, but I want to get into some other information here. There was a big hack here. Client data was compromised. And so you start to wonder when are blockchain systems going to start being used here to protect people in the future. We're also going to get into some clips here, Black Swan Capitalist, some other XRP content. This is kind of like a mixed bag of stuff. Let's just play this.
Who else is under an NDA? Okay, I think what we've got now is a stall. The big banks are trying to accumulate XRP, and not just BlackRock. That's not a bank. It's a disgustingly corrupt private equity firm. They're going to tell Ripple, help us out so we can get a boatload of XRP under $3. Mm-hmm. We don't want to buy it at 7 or 8 where it should be right now. Can you help us out to keep it under 3?
I don't know, man. Is that what's happening behind the scenes? I don't know. It's hard for me to believe that these people would get in a room and try to let's manipulate the market so you can buy XRP cheaper. I don't know if that's the case. Has that been done in the past? Absolutely. Is it being done now? I don't know for sure, guys. All right, so let's get into this. JPMorgan, Citi, and Morgan Stanley client information may have been exposed after a vendor hack. You see, all of these systems are going to be hackable as computing power gets more. And as AI agents become a reality here for everyday hacking, all of these centralized systems are vulnerable. This is why you're going to move the information, your doctor's records, your DNV records, all of this stuff needs to go on the blockchain. The screenshot highlights a major data breach impacting JPMorgan, Citi, and Morgan Stanley clients after a hack of their technology vendor, Sitmas AMC, that occurred around November 12, 2025. According to reports, sensitive client information connected to residential mortgages and broader financial records may have been exposed, though banks have not confirmed the scope of the impact. I wonder what's in these documents. This incident has prompted warnings that from these institutions have raised fresh concern over the integrity and privacy of customer data in legacy financial infrastructures. And so here's what happened. We don't really need to go through it a third time, but does this show blockchain is needed for privacy? The breach underscores the limitations of centralized databases and vendor-reliant systems, which are susceptible to large-scale hacks through single points of failure. Blockchain technology offers several enhancements to data privacy and security to financial services. Decentralization spreads data across multiple nodes, reducing the risk of a single compromised server can expose all customer information. Encryption and privacy. Blockchain transactions use advanced cryptography that can be designed with selective transparency for compliance, keeping personal identities hidden while allowing auditability. This is kind of what Ripple's been working on with the XRP ledger. Immutability and reduce fraud. Wait, really quickly. So when you're sending a payment across the world, if it has to go through a bunch of different banks, each bank needs your information, right? That's a lot of people seeing your information. Imagine that you could verify who you are, who the sender of that payment is without exposing your data to all of these banks. That is what we're talking about here. Immutability and reduce fraud. Financial records and blockchains are nearly impossible to alter retroactively, improving data integrity and reducing risks of tampering, right? There's always somebody in the data changing things. You couldn't do that on blockchain, or it'd be a whole lot harder, right? Like you would need to be a master hacker. And I haven't seen stories of that happening, but I mean, there's always going to be a first for something like that, right? Operational resilience reduces reliance on intermediaries and legacy vendors that are often form weak links in supply chain. While blockchain isn't perfect, or unhackable, it raises the bar for attackers and supports both privacy and regulatory compliance when designed correctly. All right, this is a great clip. This is Robin Vince. He's the BNY CEO. The biggest, bank, one of the biggest banks in the world, was at 53.8 trillion assets under management. Ripple partner. Let's get it.
Can you go into digital assets and sort of this trend toward tokenization and how that plays into the business model a bit?
Yeah, sure, Carl. It's a really important trend. It's one of the mega trends. We identified a series of mega trends about a year ago, and we said we want to position our business, invest in those capabilities that will allow us to benefit from those mega trends. Because while we want to drive and are driving organic growth, we also want to make sure that we're attaching ourselves to these big market cycles, and digital assets is one of them. Now, that's not just stable coins, it's also tokenization, and it really is across the ecosystem. So we've been investing around the ecosystem for using our traditional assets and then evolving our traditional business assets to be able to be on-chain as well.
All right, love that. Let's keep it going here. Franklin Templeton CEO sounds the alarm. The dollar's dominance is being chipped away, and the world urgently needs a sovereign neutral, free-floating currency to interoperable with all the others. Let me play this.
Look, dollar dominance, I always come back and say, well, where else are you going to go, right? So start with that. And, you think about the reserve currency, you're looking for stability, you're looking for strong economies, you're looking for a trust. You have to have a free-floating currency, capital, you can't have a lot of capital controls. So I don't think there's a question about the dollar dominance. I think there's a question about how much it gets chipped away, right? And you definitely see that. And you see that. And honestly, I actually think there's a lot of discussion about how tariffs and can you trust the U.S. has impacted it. But I actually go back to, in talking to some central banks, when Russia invaded the Ukraine and the U.S. froze assets of Russia in U.S. dollar, there was this could be us.
Yep. And
so I actually think it started a little bit there where people said, okay, we need to start to diversify this a bit. And then you've obviously had the comments on, how can we trust the U.S. in how they behave in certain ways. And you see it, right? You see, like when Russia was taken away from SWIFT, you now see contracts being done. India's buying oil from Russia in rupee, denominated invoicing. China and Russia are operating in the yuan. So that's the chipping away component. You still have the dollar dominance.
There's a lot of things that she said there, but what's important to know here is countries do not trust the United States right now, because if you do something the United States doesn't like, they can block you from the payment system. They can take away your access to be like a country, right? If you cannot get money in and out of your country, that limits you to everything that you can do, imports, exports, and all kinds of things. And that's why BRICS has been really trying to move away. You hear all the time, this gold-backed new currency that's coming that'll power the BRICS. You are seeing an uptick in the yuan being used, the rupee being used, and all other currencies here, because people are just concerned. They don't trust each other. And so what could come into play here? A neutral bridge asset that nobody controls. That is the true future of finance. Because listen, if you're China, you don't want to use the US dollar. If you're Russia, you don't want to use the yuan, right? If you're India, you don't want to use the yuan. You want to use the ruble, right? Everybody wants their own currency to be used globally. But if we all can't trust each other, how can we move forward? That is kind of, so much stuff going on. U.S. banks are now sitting on $395 billion in unrealized losses in quarter 2, 2025. This is also a growing problem, right? At what point is the breaking point? So let's just understand this a bit better, because this can be very complex. And I'd like to just make this a little bit more simply so we can understand what's going on here. So the post explains that the second quarter of 2025, that U.S. banks collectively have about $395 billion in unrealized losses. In simple terms, this means that these banks own a lot of assets, mostly bonds and mortgages they bought when interest rates were lower, that have dropped in market value. So remember during 2020, when all of that stuff was happening and the world kind of shut down, rates were, at 0% or they were super low. And so banks went out and they did all of this stuff. As rates went up, all of those bonds that they bought at that current time with the low rates, now the bond you're getting 4%, 5%, right? And if you got 1% or 2% bonds, there's a difference there. And that difference turns into billions of dollars when you own enough of them. And that is the losses that we're talking about here. But because they haven't actually sold these assets, the losses are only on paper for now. So they haven't really gotten those losses, so they're unrealized, right? What are unrealized losses? An unrealized loss happens when an asset owned by a bank is worth less now than what the bank paid for it, but the bank hasn't sold it yet. Most of these losses are from bonds and mortgage-backed securities bought when rates were low. As rates rise, these old bonds become less valuable. When do these losses materialize? The losses become real and realized only if banks are forced to sell these assets, such as if they need cash quickly because people withdrew too much money. So, we see the stuff happening in Japan. We know that at any second here, Japan could start dumping US treasuries. That triggers the UK, that triggers China, that triggers the rest of the world. If they start dumping bonds, these bonds become even less. These losses become even more, and people could panic. If people start removing their money from the current banking system because they're afraid of some type of collapse, it's like a house of cards. Everything is stacked up on each other right now, and these losses could go into the trillions, and that's when our system could collapse, and that's when we would need some type of reset. And that's why you hear a lot of people talking about the Great Reset and these types of things. This plays a role in all of that. All right, so what is the solution? Like, how do we get out of here? There's no easy fix, but banks can try to avoid selling these assets at a loss by holding them until they mature. So if they're, sometimes these bonds are, 5 years. I don't know exact like what the terms would be. Some of these bonds could be 10 years or 30 years, right? So each situation is going to be different, but obviously if they hold it to the maturity date, that's when they would take the losses. Regulators monitor bank health and capital buffers to make sure that they can handle risks. Some banks also hedge interest rates risks. If banks need cash and must sell, it could realize losses, hurt its earnings, and at the worst case, need to raise new money or get help from the government. Oof. All right, let's switch gears here. That was a whole lot of craziness. All right, there's a new tracker. Like if you're trying to keep up with what's going on with ETFs, I've been trying to highlight some of these new websites that you can go to, and there's a lot of really good data. So here is XRP ETF Terminal. This is another one here, so you can have like all of the different ETFs, what the 24 hours is. You can really start to monitor this stuff. They also have derivatives and so much more here. The launch queue, I think this is a really cool site. I'll see if Cas can include this down below, etf.xrpmarket.com. All right. And then, of course, let's just take a look here at XRP's real world use cases. When we're talking about a world where trust is broken, how do you rebuild that trust? Well, this could start with Ripple and XRP. So we know we have the ETFs coming in. That's going to play a big deal. We have all of this institutional money. You're talking about $60 trillion in the stock market that now be invested into crypto like XRP if they really wanted to. You have the treasury companies, right? The DAT companies that are starting to expand. Companies are starting to figure out their crypto strategies now that they understand that regulation is knocking on the door. You have Ripple, you have Evernorth, you have Weebis, Vivo Power, Wilgistic, Tridentity. Although, I'm a little unsure about this one. Worksport, Hyperscale, there's a lot of companies that are starting to form. When you announce that you're going to invest this money, right? That's a lot of publicity. People are like, oh snap, maybe we got to invest in this company since they're going to own all this XRP. Until they actually invest in it, it's just an announcement, right? So you really do need to wait for the follow-up here. XRP EVM, XRP ledgers connect to 55 different blockchains. Axelar Bridge, right? Persist. You got a bunch of different things. And Decent, Andros, Strobe, right? You have stable coins. RLUSD, USDC, XGD, Europe, USDB, a lot of different, you're going to have Japan added to this. You're going to have Africa added to this very soon. Of course, you have bridge currency, on-demand liquidity used for cross-border payments. XRP acts as a neutral bridge asset between two different fiat currencies. We talk about trust. Here is that trust. Tokenization, you got Ondo, ArcX, Open Eden, Guggenheim. Right? What's not mentioned here is Flare and in the DeFi ecosystems that are being built out. What Charles Hodgkinson is doing over there in Cardano with Midnight. All of this is going to help XRP's price increase over time. We can reduce XRP in the circulating supply that is only going to increase the price. You're going to start being able to get yield for your XRP, right? A little bit of interest. Man, this is such an incredible time to be present, to be learning, to be growing. I mean, my hats are off to you waking up every day and consuming this information. It's like, oh man, it's addicting, right? Like you just want to understand more and more and more because you know that this is the moment, right? where everything else really doesn't matter in your life. But this could be your key to financial freedom. You only get one shot about this. So take a little bit of time, extra time in your life to understand what we are dealing with here, because you will not, like a year or two goes by, you're going to miss your chance, right? Now is the time. Regulation's about to come in. Once that comes in, you're going to have insurance go, top 1,000. You're going to have all of these different, everybody's going to be here, right? When Apple and Android, you get a phone update and now you have a crypto wallet on your phone and 6 billion people can send you a stable coin or crypto. You've missed the opportunity. All right. And then big week. This video will come out on Monday morning. We are going to get Franklin Templeton and Grayscale ETFs today. What is that going to do? I will bring you updates on what's going on live tomorrow. I'm going to bring you 2 videos. It's going to have all of the latest news and information. Make sure you check those out, guys. Thanks for being here. This is a Sunday, so have a good week ahead. I'm always tipping my hat to you. Thank you for being here. All right. I'll see you next time. Aloha.